This is a little short piece for my sister-in-law Jean, who's writing up the family tree, going way back to the McPhees. She wanted to know how Betty and I happened to meet. Actually, it was fate, I guess. I was in a pararescue school at MacDill Air Force Base. I was an instructor in the school. One day we're up for live jump, and O.C. Smith was the jump master, and Shorty Risto and myself were safety men. And on the first pass, we threw out the rope head, which is a dummy made of rope with no arms and no legs, and with lead in the center, and it's wearing a normal-sized parachute. And it drifts, and we used it to give us the direction we'd drift once we jumped out of the airplane. We threw the dummy out on O.C. Smith's orders, and the static line broke, which means no line was attached to the airplane to open the parachute. The dummy must have flipped and caught the static line around itself. Anyway, the dummy went sailing down from 10,000 feet and went through the house of the living quarters of the enlisted personnel, through the roof, through the second floor, down, and embedded itself in the cement in the ground floor. On the way down through the second floor, a lady was laying on a couch, and she was pregnant. And the dummy came right through the ceiling, hit the table, took the table and the rug right out from underneath her couch and down to the first floor. Nobody was injured. There was a man and a woman in the kitchen of the lower unit, but nobody was injured except the two-story family quarters was about demolished. The general wasn't too happy, and my boss and friend, and still friend, Colonel Perry Emmons, who we just recently went to a reunion with, said that the general wasn't happy and that something had to be done to the people that were responsible. Well, it was an accident. Nobody was responsible. So O.C. Smith, who had 23 years and at that time retired, I was transferred to Goose Bay, Labrador, and Shorty Ristor was transferred to Fairbanks, Alaska. At Goose Bay, I was put in charge of the pararescue team and land rescue team, which is out about 7 miles from the base. We had our own living quarters out there, and besides being the pararescue and land rescue team on 24-hour alert, I had 77 dogs. They were pot wolf, pot husky, that we trained for rescue missions, plus jumping out of airplanes with us. We had a little club up in Goose Bay for the enlisted men. I was a staff sergeant at that time. And my gang used to like to go up there on Saturdays and Sundays, and in those days I didn't really care too much for that stuff. And one day I went up to, when we would go up, I had a cart with wheels on in the summertime, and I'd take 3 dogs and ride up either to get some supplies for ourselves or go up to the PX, or once in a while I would stop in the club, but as a rule I didn't. one day, one of my jumpers was in the PX, and I ran into him, and he had two young ladies with him. And it turned out that his girlfriend was a Betty Foley that worked for the Public Works Department, and her girlfriend. And they invited me to come up to a party at the club, and I don't know, somehow Betty and I seemed to hit it off. We did a lot of dancing, a lot of talking. Said that I told her I didn't care much for that kind of stuff, and she said, well, how come you've never been up to the club? And I said, well, on the weekend I usually hook a few dogs up and go out in the wild bush up there, take my rifle and some food and a pup tent, and spend my idle hours out in the wilderness. She said, oh, she loved to do that. And so I said, well, sometime I'll ask you. About a week later, a truckload of civil servants up there, which Betty was one of them, arrived for the tour of the dog kennels and wanted to know the history of the dogs. And we made our own harnesses and sleds. And so we gave them the 10-cent tour and took them up to the parachute shop and showed them how to pack a parachute, and what you had to do when making a parachute on landing and everything. And Betty kind of got over near me, and we got to chatting, and she said, she told me the dogs were beautiful, and she loved animals. And I said, well, I'm going on a 3-day trip starting Friday afternoon. She wanted to know if she could go. And I said, well, how about your boyfriend? But she said, well, we're really just good friends. He's not my boyfriend. So one afternoon, before that trip, it had snowed, and the snowplow had cleared the road up to the base, and damn if she didn't come walking in the kennels. And of course, all the guys saw her coming, and hey, Chuck, your girlfriend's here, and I guess ever since then, she was considered my girlfriend. Anyway, we went on a trip and had a great time. Caught some fish through the ice, and she'd ride in the sled, and I'd run along behind her. And we pitched our tent. We traveled, on the weekend, we traveled about 100 miles, 3 or 4 different places. And in the course of the first year up there, whenever I didn't have to pull alert, relieve some of my men, we'd get together and go out on camping or canoeing trips when it was warm. And finally, it dawned on me that I'd been knocking around for all the years, and I had finally found myself a nice little Irish girl who liked to do the things that I liked to do. And we got along good. So I went to the PX and had him order me a diamond engagement ring. And at a Halloween party, or not a Halloween party, it was a costume party, I asked her if she would be interested in marrying me. And I gave her the ring, and she looked at it and just smiled and said she couldn't wait to tell her family. So that was in 1949, I think. And I was supposed to have been relieved in January of 50. But they, something happened and they extended me for 6 months. But on the pretense of me getting relieved in January, Betty had left her job and had gone home to Ottawa. So during that time, with no communication between the two of us, nobody knew what the other one was doing. And finally I got my orders that said I could go back to the States. And we had made plans. I went to Ottawa, and one time before we came back, I raced the sled dogs in Ottawa, the 100-mile race on the Rideau Canal, and I met her sister and her sister Jean and her whole family. And then I went down to my new assignment at Westover Field, Massachusetts. And Betty arrived, and we had a mix-up on getting the marriage papers in the church and everything straightened out. And finally we got married at the chapel at Westover Air Force Base. And moved into an apartment house in Holyoke, where a year later Michael was born.